the topic this morning, I want to tell you this is something that I'm really, really passionate about. I feel pretty strongly about it. It's probably one of the topics, I have to tell you right off the bat, that's a little bit more controversial because there's so many differing opinions about it. And that's okay. Everybody's allowed to their opinion. But the reason why I developed this webinar, and I've actually given it a few times to a few nonprofits, it's because this has happened in every single nonprofit that I have worked at in the past, in my 20 years. And that is where there's this huge misunderstanding about what philanthropy is exactly. And there's a lot of these kind of competitions internally, or what I like to call a me versus them attitude. So, we've got the people working directly with service users who, do their job, and we have the administration people doing their jobs, and we have everybody's working off in their little teams, but nobody seems to be talking to each other. And when it comes to philanthropy, we see it a lot. There's definitely that kind of mentality that, hey, that's not my job. Philanthropy doesn't belong to me. That belongs to somebody else. I'm not going near that. And, I feel pretty strongly, I disagree with that. First of all, I'm sure you could probably guess. But I honestly believe that philanthropy belongs to everybody. And you'll see what I mean when I start going into the presentation. But that's really important right off the bat, is that the whole team needs to be a part of this. And so that's why I developed this presentation. And we'll see if you can identify with some of the things I'm going to talk about here. So the reason I say that it's a little bit controversial is because a lot of people, they do find it intimidating as a concept for a lot of different reasons. And one reason is that they think philanthropy is related only to money or donations. And so right off the bat, they feel very, very uncomfortable talking about donations and fundraising, okay? But I can tell you right now, we can erase that out of our minds, because philanthropy is not just about donations. It's much more, and we're going to get into that. There's a lot of people in organizations that feel like it's not their responsibility, like, hey, that's not my job. Like I just said, they feel like I'm going to do the service delivery, or I'm going to do my admin work, and everything that is related to fundraising, that's somebody else's job. Some people in organizations, they feel like we can't get our staff and our volunteers involved because they already work for the cause. So we can't ask them to do any more. They're already doing lots. And I agree, they are doing lots. But as we'll see, there are ways that we can involve everybody in philanthropy. We also have organizations who believe that, in this, I can tell you, this is all organizations that I work with. They all believe this. They believe that we can't ask our service users. So in your case, your parents and families, organizations believe that we can't ask them for their support because we don't want them to feel like they're obligated to give. And, they really don't have the means of giving, or they feel bad, or they feel guilty asking. And if you feel that way, don't worry, I get it. And I can tell you probably 99% of the organizations I work with feel that way. And we're going to get into that, why we can overcome that. And like I said, for all those reasons, it can feel a little bit controversial, or it can feel kind of weird. Nobody likes to really, not too many people, I should say, like to get into philanthropy, okay? But once you start understanding exactly what philanthropy is and what a philanthropic culture is, I think you'll see that there's different ways that everybody can participate. Okay, so let's start first, before we get into a philanthropic culture, with what is philanthropy. So if we look at the true definition of philanthropy, it's simply love for humankind. It's really, really simple. That's what philanthropy means, okay? But it encompasses a lot more than that. So, we can talk about caring for others, doing good, promoting the well-being of others, making a donation or a gift. It can be actions to better humanity, or volunteering, altruism. Those are all ways that we can think of philanthropy. So when you look at it, that's huge. That's huge. That can encompass everything and anything, and that encompasses all of the work that you do and your organizations do, and the people who work for and volunteer for your organizations do. We all fit in there, all of us, no exception. Okay. So like I mentioned, and you're going to hear me say this a lot of times, unfortunately, where philanthropy gets a bad rap is that we automatically associate with donations, okay? So we have to get out of that thinking, okay? Philanthropy is so much more than that. And if we start to understand that it's more than about donations, that's where we can see that it's everybody's responsibility. Anybody who's tied to the school, the community, or organization, everybody has a role to play. No questions asked. I feel really strongly about that. And again, we'll see how, okay? So when everybody in your organization or in the school community understands what philanthropy is, that's when we can start to create a philanthropic culture, okay? So that's why, like I said, philanthropy is huge. It's huge. Everybody's already playing a role in that, okay? So this is how we're going to create a philanthropic culture. So first I want to see, you know, you don't have to answer. This is just to get you thinking. Let's start with this first question. Would you say that you have a philanthropic culture within your organization? So based on what I just said in terms of a definition of philanthropy, would you say you have a philanthropic culture within your organization? Let's see if this happens to you. Okay. Do some team members feel that their realities or their responsibilities are misunderstood by their colleagues? So I'll give you an example here to make it a little bit more clear. Okay. So in one of the organizations I worked with, it was a hospice, and I think I mentioned this before. And so we have like the caregivers, so the nurses and the doctors who work directly with patients and families. And we have like the administration team who takes care of everything from fundraising and communications and anything that's administrative. And when I worked at this hospice, there was very much that us versus them mentality, which is not very healthy. Where we had the nursing team or the caregivers who thought that we didn't understand, they thought the administration team didn't understand their reality, what it was like to work with the people they were providing services to. Whereas we had the administration team who was also working hard to raise money to support the work of the hospice. And the administration team felt like the medical team or the nursing team didn't understand their reality of having to go out there and constantly raise money. So we had like these two teams. We were not working as a team, first of all, let's just say that. And we felt like our realities were misunderstood. So, I think that happens there was no exception there. I think that happens in a lot of organizations when we have different teams like that, where we sort of feel like we don't really understand each other's responsibilities or realities. What are they doing over there? What are they responsible for? Okay, so you may be going through some of that. Do people view the role of philanthropy as belonging to a single person or a few members of the team? So again, this happens a lot too, where we have team members who will say, well, that's not my job. That doesn't belong to me. Doing philanthropy or, doing all that stuff that we talked about, that belongs to somebody else. Are people this is a big one, are people in your organization embarrassed or uncomfortable when it comes to talking about philanthropy? So given what I said, that most people associate philanthropy with money or with donations, that's a given right there. Most people are really embarrassed and they're totally uncomfortable talking about donations and asking for donations, and that's okay. I get that. That's not for everybody. But again, when we consider that philanthropy isn't just about donations, it's much more, we shouldn't be embarrassed and we shouldn't be uncomfortable. Okay, so we're going to get more into that, but that could be a reality that you're experiencing right now. Okay, so if I haven't said it already. Building a philanthropic culture is everybody's responsibility. So whether that's the directors, the school board, the principal, staff, parents, families, students, any kind of stakeholders, everybody has a role to play, okay? And there are different ways, and don't worry, we're going to get into what those different ways are, but I just really want it to be clear that everybody has to play a role. So what is a philanthropic culture? Okay, so philanthropic culture, that's when we talk about the values, practices, and actions that support and encourage philanthropy within your organization. So that's huge. I mean, that encompasses so much. Values, practices, and actions that encourage and support philanthropy. So when we look at that definition of philanthropy, and we talked about doing good and altruism, and it could include volunteering, it's huge. So any kind of values, practices, and actions like that, that's philanthropy. So anybody within the organization can play a role in doing that. Okay. So why does the concept of philanthropy need to be understood by the entire team? Well, first of all, it's important for the mission of your organization. If you want your organization to thrive and survive and to continue getting funding and to continue getting, well, various kinds of support, well, philanthropy is essential to that. Everybody on the team needs to understand how your needs can be met, okay? And that doesn't just mean funding requirements. That can be any needs, whether that's volunteer needs, whether that's certain support needs that you have. That's philanthropy. So everybody needs to understand, what are your needs? A philanthropic culture allows everybody to use the same messages and dialogue. So again, like, this is really important. Like, when we're out there talking about our organization and what it is that we do, we have to make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody's using the same messages. So again, I can give you an example. Like, when I can go back to the hospice example, you know, even though the nursing team, for example, wasn't directly doing some of the, for example, asking for donations, or that's okay. That was our responsibility. You know, if a family said to them, oh, well, you know, how much does it cost? Because all the services were free. If a family said, you know, well, what are the costs? What does it cost for a family to stay here? Well, everybody should be able to answer that. Like, everybody should have the same messages, same dialogue. We're not asking them to say, well, you know, it costs $450 per day to have one patient, and, you know, we really, really would like families to make donations. That's not what we're asking them to do. We're asking people to be clearly aware of what your needs are. So do you get government support? Do you get donations? Or why do you need support? What are your needs? Everybody needs to be aware of that. Not to ask for donations, but just simply to be clear on what are those needs. When the entire team's on board, it's a lot easier to find support, because everyone becomes an ambassador for your cause. So everybody can relate those messages, everybody can talk about it. So it's not just one person that's out there talking about all the good that you do. Everybody can do it. Understanding each other's role allows us to better deliver the mission to students and families. So I think that's a given. So when we understand that, again, I'm going to go back to my example. If us as the administrative team, we understand that, hey, that nursing team, they're directly working with patients and families, and they're doing an amazing job making sure that we can meet our patient needs, etc. Well, then that makes my job easier to go and sell the organization and to get support, and vice versa. So really important for everybody to understand what their roles are, you know, and it goes in all ways. Everybody needs to understand each other's roles. Okay, so having a strong philanthropic culture allows us to create a close-knit team. Well, I think that's a given. I think when we understand each other, when we're talking to each other, we understand each other's roles and responsibilities. When we realize that we all have a role to play, of course, it's going to make for a more close-knit team. Okay, so here are some clues, some signs that your organization is not evolving in a philanthropic culture, okay? We're going to look at the signs after that show that you are, but first let's look at the signs telling me that you're not, okay? So if staff and volunteers use negative terms when referring to fundraising, things like begging for money and charity, you know, all those kind of negative terms that we, but it's so common. It's so common. Like even people who work in the field sometimes make that mistake. But you know, it's a whole mentality. And we, you know, if we can switch that mentality, you know, I always say to people, you know, we're not fundraisers, we're storytellers, okay? And if you can just switch that, it totally changes the mentality, because instead of, when we say fundraiser, it's that kind of weird kind of feeling where we're like salesy, and you know, that's where the begging and the charity and all that comes from. But when we can make that switch from saying, you know, from using the word fundraising to storytelling, because that's what we're doing essentially, we're telling the organization's story. Then, so we don't even have to ask for money at that point. We're just telling the story and convincing people that way. Then we take away all that ickiness around it where it becomes salesy and begging and all that. So if your team is embarrassed or reluctant when it comes to talking about your needs, well, again, that's a sign. Like I said, you know, we're not asking people to ask for donations, but they have to be able to talk about what the needs are. You know, if your needs are that you depend on funding in order to do your mission, well, there's nothing wrong with saying that, okay? So we can't be embarrassed to say that we have needs. Another sign is when your responsibilities surrounding philanthropy belong to one person. So the CDA or the parent committee responsible for fundraising. So most of the team feels like it doesn't concern them, that philanthropy is, again, somebody else's job and it doesn't concern them. When the organization depends on just a few funding sources to cover all of its fundraising need or funding needs, I should say. So for example, if you know, if an organization is only relying on government grants instead of looking at different strategies and sources of funding, you know, that could be a sign that maybe you're not in a philanthropic culture, because you're just depending on those government grants when really, and actually, there's probably a whole lot more that you could be accessing. The participation rate from staff, volunteers, families, etc., in philanthropic initiatives is low. So again, I just want to emphasize, I'm not talking about just donations here, because when I say this, a lot of people, that's where they automatically jump to, well, we can't, yeah, our families know that, we can't, you know, they can't donate, and that's okay. But when I talk about philanthropy, you know, it's all those other things I talked about, and I'm going to go into detail. Don't worry, I'm coming up on that. In what are the different ways that people can participate in philanthropy? There's so much more. So we really can get the participation of everybody. Okay, so here are the signs that your organization is evolving in a philanthropic culture, okay? So all team members understand what your needs are and they're ready to support philanthropic efforts. And this last part is important here, not because they're forced to, but because they want to, because they believe in the cause, they're there for the right reasons, and they want to get on board. Everyone represents the organization, whether that's internally or externally, and helps to communicate key messages. So when I say represent the organization, I mean, how many times does that happen where, you know, you're out somewhere either representing your organization or at a conference or even in your own personal life, and, you know, people talk about what your organization, what you do, and you talk about your organization. Well, that's representing your organization. That's being an ambassador. That's communicating. communicating key messages. The team understands how donations are used and their impact. Okay, that's really important. Everybody on the team needs to understand how donations are helping the organization. What is the impact? What difference are donations making for your organization?
And Marie-Claude, just to plug your previous session,
Mm-hmm.
if you did not see that live, there's a recording on communicating impact, and Marie-Claude went into a lot of details on how we can do that.
Absolutely, and that impact is gonna be such. If there's one thing that you can do for your organization, and it's not just about reporting back on, for if you have funders that gave you money and you have to report back to them on your impact. Reporting on impact is good for anybody at all times, even if you're making a solicitation. It's good for when you're talking to any of your stakeholders. So yes, for sure, I encourage you to have a look at that. Another sign that you're evolving in a philanthropic culture is if you're open to having donor and stakeholder visits. Now, I know that's not always possible, but if for some reason, with your schools and your community, you have special days or, special events, things like that, well, you should be open to encouraging people to come and have a look at that, because that's a direct way of showing, again, impact. And everybody in the organization should be involved in those, not just one person organizing. So that's a great sign that you're evolving in a philanthropic culture. Your service users and volunteers are considered important sources of information and are consulted to obtain their opinions and motivations. So, sometimes, I get that when we're in our everyday jobs and responsibilities, we're sort of working in our silos, and we forget sometimes to talk and get the feedback from some of our service users and volunteers. And when we do that, we can discover some great information that maybe we weren't aware of. So if you can do that, if you can get into that habit of having those conversations and communicating with your service users and volunteers, I think, again, you could get some really valuable information that's going to help you out, and it's going to help you evolve too. Okay, so I said I would be coming up on the different ways. So I said it's not just donations, so here they are. Again, philanthropy is not just donations. There are several different ways that we can demonstrate our philanthropy. So I'm going to show you 6 of them. And of course, I'm going to start with the most obvious, the one I just said, that it's not just donations, but we have to start with that one because obviously that's the most obvious. So this is just one way that we can encourage a philanthropic culture. It's the most obvious. This is what most people associate with philanthropy. And again, I know it's the most obvious way to contribute to an organization's philanthropic culture. Always provide the opportunity for individuals to make a donation, and never assume that someone does not want to or cannot contribute to your cause, okay? We always have this joke in fundraising where we say, what's the #1 reason why people don't give? Well, because we never ask them. So, and that's so true. And we shouldn't, this is where some of the controversy comes in. And, I get it. I feel for people. I get it when people say that, we can't ask for donations. I get it. But at the same time, when people do that, they're assuming themselves that other people don't want to contribute. And, who are we to do that? Because we don't know. Maybe, those people do want to give back. And, any contribution, any amount is important, but we should give them that opportunity. If they can't give, they can't give. And we totally respect that. But maybe they do want to. And I can honestly say, in over 20 years of doing this work, you know, it's not always the people who we think are going to give, the people who are we think are going to be the most generous who are. Sometimes it's the people who, you know, we don't want to have these kind of, we don't want to have judgments, but sometimes it's the people that we say, oh, I don't think we can really ask for donations. Sometimes it's those very people who are the most generous and who will find ways to do their part. And every amount is important, but we have to give people the opportunity to decide for themselves. You know, sometimes that we often say too is that, how can we possibly ask people outside our organization to give if people within the organization aren't convinced? So, you know, again, I know that can be controversial. There's actually a lot of controversy around this, because there's some fundraisers that will say, well, you know, for example, every board member, everybody in the organization should make a donation no matter the amount. It doesn't matter how small it is, but everybody should give some amount to demonstrate that they did their part, you know, because then how can we go ask people outside the organization to give if we haven't ourselves? So you have people who have that belief, and you have the other extreme where people think, you know, no, everybody should just donate if they want to, and if they don't, they don't. You know, it's hard to say what's right. You're the one who's in the best position to judge. One thing that I will say for sure, though, is that nobody should ever be made to feel obligated to give. There should never be any pressure to give. Nobody should be made to feel guilty for not giving. If somebody gives, it has to be out of the goodness of their heart because they want to, not because there was an expectation that was set upon them to make that donation. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So all donations are important and make a difference no matter what. So it doesn't matter what the amount is, they all matter. So, you know, because we see that coming out a lot of times too. Oh, but, you know, I can't really give because it's so small. What I'd give you anyways, it's not going to make a difference. Well, no, that's not true. You know, if everybody had that thought, then nobody would give. So all donations are important no matter the amount. And each person gives according to their means and their capacity. So again, you know, it's going to depend on your situation. It's going to depend on what your values and opinions are around this subject. But I really do believe that we shouldn't make assumptions. You know, people will want to give according to their means and their capacity. And if they can't give a donation, there's other ways that they can get involved with us, and that's what we're going to get to. So volunteering. If they can't make a donation, why not volunteer? This is a great way to give back. So, and it's considered part of the philanthropic culture, of course. We can give a gift of time or expertise. So it doesn't just have to be, we're giving time to an organization. If we're good at something, why not give what we're good at? There's more and more businesses who are offering this option. So I'm sure you've probably seen it where here where I live in the Eastern Townships in the industrial sector, you know, we have like IBM and General Electric, companies like that, and all of them are now going this route where instead of giving donations to organizations, they're sending staff out to go and volunteer. So these are actually paid days. So the volunteers are actually getting paid during a regular work day, and instead of showing up at work, they go to the organization to do volunteer work. So this is a great option. You know, so check around. There's a lot of businesses that are going this route now. So I'm sure there's going to be some in your area where you are. It's just a matter of doing a little bit of research and asking around. Service users often want to give back this way if they can't donate. So like we said, you know, that's okay. Not everybody can donate, but your service users, if they can give back some time, why not? Because a lot of them will want to give back in some way or another. but sometimes they just don't know how. So this is a great opportunity for them to do that. Sometimes if you have fundraising activities or you have organizing committees for these activities, that can be another way of people to, you know, give back and to get involved in the philanthropic culture. Another way that people can get involved is with acknowledgements and thank yous. So, you know, this is an easy one here. This is a no-brainer. Nobody likes to do solicitations. Nobody likes to ask for money, and that's okay. But everybody can say thank you. That, there's no exceptions. That, you know, everybody can be involved in saying thank yous. You know, I was involved in an organization where we set up a thank you call system for our donors. So what we would do is, you know, we would distribute one name, one donor name with the phone number to our board members. And those board members, all they had to do, we didn't want them to ask for money, to request a donation, none of that. It was simply to call the donor and say, hi, I'm a board member with such and such an organization, and I'm calling you because I wanted to thank you very much for your last donation to our cause. It's really appreciated. And the donor would just like almost pass out, because you know, donors are so used to receiving solicitation calls, but never do they get thank you calls, let alone from a board member. So, you know, like I said, I get that not everybody is comfortable soliciting donations, and that's totally okay. Everybody has their strengths, and that's okay, but everybody can be involved in saying thank you, okay? So, like I said, all team members can do this. All team members can contribute to a philanthropic culture by thanking the organization's donors and stakeholders. So this is a really easy one. And, you know, this can be done different ways. It can be done with either a thank you call. It can be done with, you know, a little thank you note. It can be that you know, you guys decide to shoot a little 30-second video and you send it to your donor, or you put it on your Facebook or whatever. But it can be really, really simple. But again, everybody can say thank you. Well, I made this point already. Well, the thank you donor program, that's what I just talked about. So really, that's where you would just, really, really simple, just, you know, donations that come in, just get different people in your organization to be involved in the process. You know, it can be your staff, it can be volunteers. Sometimes, depending, I know this can be sensitive and we have to be careful. Sometimes maybe you can even get a service user involved in a thank you. I know that's sensitive, we have to be careful. Sometimes there's confidentiality issues, etc. But you know what? Sometimes it's as simple as, well, for some of you who took my impact webinar, you saw the visual slide. Remember the one where the little girl had done a drawing and it said thank you? And you know, why not send that to a donor? It's little things like that that make such a difference. Again, I talked about the videos or the pictures, so you can get really creative, and you know, again, keep it simple. We're not trying to create more work here. We're just trying to make it fun and get everybody involved in this process. Another way to get everybody involved in the philanthropic culture is with building awareness and simply with the messages that are being communicated, okay? So if your team members aren't comfortable talking about funding, change your dialogue, okay? So instead of talking about fundraising, you know, think of it as storytelling, okay? So you're communicating messages, okay? And you can talk about the difference that donors are making in your organization. It's not about asking for money. It's about listening to your people, telling them what you do as an organization, and you're creating opportunities for them to make significant changes. So again, it's just about switching your messages, and it makes a huge difference in your comfort level when it comes to talking about this. So all team members have to be on the same page when it comes to messages, okay? So that, you know, it can be creating a little cheat sheet with key messages, things like that, but we have to make sure everybody understands what the key messages are. And be, you know, I want to say that this can take time. This is not going to happen overnight. And again, you know, I've seen this in all the organizations I've worked with when we're trying to create this philanthropic culture, especially with changing the dialogue and the messages and making that switch. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So be patient, be persistent. It'll come, but you know, it's not going to happen overnight. I just want to emphasize that. Another great way is for people within the organization to be ambassadors, okay? So being an ambassador is representing the organization internally and externally. So like I said earlier, when you're out there in the community and talking about your organization, well, it comes back to those key messages, okay? So make sure you're able to talk about those key messages, and that's totally, you know, a part of a philanthropic culture when you can be an ambassador. So spreading the messages, promoting them, sharing the importance of the mission. So another great example with this is that, you know, I talked about this, I think I don't know if it was the last webinar or the first one, but you know, I'm sure that, for example, if you're using Facebook, if you have people following you on Facebook who are constantly liking your things or sharing your things or commenting, you know, sometimes it can be some of your service users. Well, those are great ambassadors. You know, if they're already spreading your messages, hey, that's a philanthropic culture. That's being an ambassador. They're playing a role. So why not get more people involved in that? The more you can spread your message, the more you're going to get people raising awareness about what it is that you do, and the easier your job to get funding will become. So this is like a customer service role, and all staff members should participate in this automatically. We all have a role to play in customer service and taking care of our service users. A great way to be to take part in the philanthropic culture as an ambassador is to report back on issues and comments witnessed or heard in order for the organization to improve. So I'm going to go back to my example in this with the hospice where I work. So obviously, if we were part of the administrative team, excuse me, and we didn't have as much contact with patients and families, it was hard for us to know, like, what are their preferences, what do they want. You know, we're not the ones that had direct contact with our service users. It was the nursing team. So it was really important for that nursing team, if they heard things or comments or ways that we could improve, it was important for them to communicate that back to us. Well, it's the same with you in your organizations. If you have people directly working with your service users, well, you know, and if they're hearing things or they're getting comments, it's important for them to share those with you or with the organization so that you can continually improve. If, you know, if nobody's sharing that precious information, you know, we can't evolve. We're not going to be able to innovate and make changes. So it's that communication is really important, and that ambassador role is really important. And again, you know, if I haven't said it enough, all staff members have to play this role. So, testimonials. Okay, this is a terrific way, especially for your service users, for your families, you know, students, anybody that's benefiting from your services. You know, again, if they can't make a donation, if they can't volunteer, well, this is one way they can definitely get involved, is they can do a testimonial. Whether it's in writing, whether it's in video, however, and again, I know that there's confidentiality issues, but they can be anonymous. We don't have to have any names tied, but anybody that has received your services, if they got something, they were satisfied, it made a world of difference for them, you were able to help them, why couldn't they write one little sentence, one little paragraph about the difference that your organization has made for them? You know, and you can use those testimonials to talk about your impact afterwards, the impact that you're having in the community. So this is a really simple one. There, you know, we can ask our service users to do this for us, and I'm sure most of them would be more than happy to do that. We just haven't asked them. So again, it can be staff, families, but it can also be your donors, your volunteers. So if you have volunteers with your organization, ask them to do a testimony. Why are they getting involved with you? Why did they choose to do this work? So again, that's a great way. Donors too. Why did a donor choose to give to your organization? So we can use these testimonials again in whether it's on our social media, whether it's on our Facebook, or sorry, on our website, in our annual reports. These are great ways to talk about the impact that we've had on people's lives. So again, if a donation is not possible, everybody can do this. Everybody can do this. There's no exception. And video testimonials can be really powerful. So again, I know that not everybody can do it, but if you do have a chance to do it, especially with younger generations, you know, sometimes doing something in writing is, you know, it's not as popular. So if you can do it by video and there's no confidentiality issues, I highly encourage you to do it. And then, like I said, this is a great way afterwards that you can go and share these testimonials on Facebook, put it on your website, etc. Okay, so those were all the different ways that we can get our people involved. So as you saw, there's way more than donations. People can get involved in many different ways, and I'm sure everybody can find their way of contributing somewhere in those methods. So there's no excuses for somebody to not get involved in a philanthropic culture. So what are the roles and responsibilities of everybody in a philanthropic culture? So we're going to start with the leadership positions, okay? So anybody who's in the leadership position in your organization, these are some of the things that they should be doing. So one is ensuring that the organization's mission and that vision are clear and well understood. So I think I talked a little bit about this last time we did the webinar, I think, or maybe I'm getting confused, but we all have our missions, and sometimes our mission statements can be very long and complex and kind of convoluted, and you know, internally we understand them, but maybe if we put ourselves in the shoes of somebody outside the organization, they don't really get it, what we're doing. They don't really get what we're trying to say with our mission. So make sure, you know, like I said last time, I'm not advocating that you change your mission statement. It's just that make sure in your messages that everybody's clear on what it is, what's your mission. So if it is kind of hard to understand, it's not super clear, make sure that you can develop some key messages where you can sort of take your mission and make that wording clear for everybody. Make sure you determine well-established roles and responsibilities and expectations for each. So again, I'll give you an example. If we want everybody in the organization to act as an ambassador and to communicate those key messages, well, we have to make that clear to them, and we have to give them the tools to make sure that they can do that, to make sure that those key messages are clear. Work with existing groups, so PPO, home and school, governing board to develop and creating, sorry, I'm going to close my thing, to develop a strategy for creating a philanthropic culture, okay? Present the opportunity to meet and talk with families. So what a great opportunity to get feedback from them. Act as a philanthropic ambassador within the organization and the community. So we already talked about this. So everybody needs to be an ambassador, no matter within the organization and outside. You have to understand and promote the philanthropic culture using appropriate language and messages. So this goes back to, we were kind of joking about, but you know, it doesn't help if the leadership positions are talking about philanthropy as begging or as charity, or you know, all those other negative terms. So we have to use appropriate language. Our leaders have to set the example and use the right messages. It would be important for leadership positions to develop relationships and identify potential donors and make contact with them. So that doesn't necessarily mean right off the bat that we're asking for donations or we're asking them to come volunteer with us. It just means we identify them. We start looking at, okay, who could be potential, and we start developing relationships with them. Be present and participate at the organization's fundraising activities or other events. So this is one that, again, I feel pretty strongly about it. You know, this happened so many times at organizations where I've worked, where we would host these fundraising activities, or sometimes it wasn't even related, it was other events, it wasn't even related to fundraising. And you know, sometimes we didn't even have, you know, board members show up or leadership positions show up. And, you know, what kind of message does that send, you know, when we don't even have our leadership present at these events? So, you know, we have to set the example. So this is really important that we participate and that we be present. Play an active role in acknowledging donors. So again, that goes back to the thank yous. You know, everybody needs to play a role in the thank yous, but leadership positions especially need to play a role in thanking our donors. And helping maintain existing relationship with donors. So whether that means inviting them to come visit, sharing impact reports with them, however you choose, but we have to maintain those relationships. Okay, so the next one is responsibilities for staff and volunteers. So anybody else who's involved with the organization. So of course, act as an ambassador. We went over that. Promote the philanthropic culture using appropriate language. So just like the leadership positions, you know, for us too, for any staff and volunteers, it's important that we use the right language and not use those negative terms. We have to help develop relationships on behalf of the organization and in support of the cause. And especially if we're those frontline people and we're the ones who are directly working with the people we're providing services to, we're the ones who are developing those relationships. Pay attention to the interests and needs of families and community and donors. So, you know, it's important to get the full picture. So this goes back to the example I was giving with, again, at the hospice, when we had the nursing team working directly with the people we provide services to. They're the ones who are on the front lines. They're the ones who are actually working with people and getting that feedback. So for us at the administration, it's really important that we share that information amongst ourselves so that we get the full picture of what's going on. Well, the same applies to your organization. Be present and participate at the organization's fundraising activities or other events. So, you know, I'm not necessarily advocating that, you know, sometimes when I say this, people say, well, you know, if it's a fundraising activity, you know, I can't, I'll give you an example. Let's say it's a supper, some kind of benefit supper. I'm not saying that, you know, staff have to buy tickets to attend whatever fundraising activity you're hosting. But why could they be involved as a volunteer at the event or something like that? That's a great way to participate. Play an active role in acknowledging donors. So again, you can play a role in thanking your donors. You can help maintain existing relationship with donors as well. So again, you can see how everybody needs to play a role here. So we have a question coming up. So this one is, okay, what do you see as possible roles and responsibilities for staff, parents, community volunteers, school administration, school boards, and CDA? So what do you see as potential roles and responsibilities for those people?
I'm thinking because the different individuals that are named have such different roles within the schools. But what I'm thinking about is with our PPOs and our governing boards, how to kind of communicate this framework and this culture shift. Because you're right, we always go to fundraising and volunteering. But when we have like our CLC action plans or different goals and objectives, I'll give an example. We tried starting a bike program this year, and we went straight to the activities versus really building more of a culture of why is cycling important? How do we solicit some more, equipment for students? How, just communicating out more, how can we all get involved around a certain initiative or objective or project? So that's kind of where my thinking is, but I think it's a big question to answer for all of those different, staff, parents, community, school. That's complex. It's hard to answer that. Going from how do we fund it and how do we do it?
Yeah.
And there's so much more that happens around that. So that's kind of what my big takeaway is.
Absolutely. Because if you take any of these projects or programs that each one of you help bring into the schools and into your communities, as you're going through that and maybe as a reflection piece, how can each of these play a role, and what would their role be within this, philanthropic culture as it pertains to your project?
Yeah, I agree. That's a great point. And what we'll probably notice is that every different person in this group could possibly have very, very different roles too. And it's going to go with comfort levels, and it's going to go also with capacity and what they're able to do. So that's why, we want to present what different opportunities, different types of roles that people can have in the philanthropic culture, and finding which role is appropriate for who. So yeah, no, that's a great point.
And we have Lynn that mentions in the chat, she says that she finds that there are several key staff members who lay the groundwork for a project, and then the rest that come on board in one role or another. And that really speaks to kind of like starting where there's most excitement and energy, and then having going to what Marie-Claude was saying about the ambassadors, have them become ambassadors and share out that message, and then helping that reach all of the others.
Excellent, good point. Thank you. So how to encourage the development of a philanthropic culture. So I'm just going to let you know, for this next part, I'm not going to spend too much time, because I think a lot of you are already doing some of the suggestions that I'm going to talk about here, and you're already doing a great job. So it's more going to serve as a reminder to keep doing those things, and if it can give you a few other ideas, then great. So okay, so one of the things that we want to encourage is meetings. So I talked about it a lot, the regular communication. So making sure that we're talking to each other. So, often I don't think we're doing enough of that. So when we're having these internal meetings, those are between different players here that are involved, I think it's a great opportunity to communicate important information. But, we have to we have to treat these meetings, we're not just reporting back on stuff. Sometimes we have a tendency to, we just show up and we have our agenda and it's like strictly reporting, but sometimes we have to, get a little bit more creative. Okay, so the idea behind inviting and presenting families at your meetings, if it's appropriate to do that, is because it's always interesting to see, what impact you're having. So sometimes we would do this at some of our meetings, some of our internal meetings, or some of our board meetings, because sometimes people are not working directly on the front lines, and so they hear about this stuff, but they never get to meet the people. So this is a great way to get buy-in, and like I said, to get people excited about what reasons are they, why are they there? Why are they working for the organization? Well, when they see a family and they see the concrete evidence of the difference they're making, it's a great motivator. You can also present different kind of interesting and varied discussion topics. So, get people's feedback. What would they like to talk about? It doesn't always have to be so cut and dry, and, you make it interesting, make it fun. Sometimes you can organize your meetings and your presentations in different departments, and you can explain what a philanthropic culture is and the importance of all team members helping out. So even sharing something like this presentation with them, and talking to them a little bit about what a philanthropic culture is. It has to start somewhere, and like I was saying earlier, it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to start somewhere by, using that dialogue and starting to talk about it and how everybody can play a role. So like I said, in meetings, don't just report back, because yes, reports are important. We need to do that, but make sure that everybody feels useful. Make sure that everybody gets to contribute and give their feedback. Learning opportunities and sharing expertise. So I know that you're already doing this, and I know that with this, this is a huge part of your culture. So expanding knowledge and skills can empower and give confidence. So you all know that already. So this is a great way to encourage internally a philanthropic culture when we value people's skills and knowledge, and we give them opportunities to continue learning and develop their skills, and we give them training. That's a great way of demonstrating that, hey, we care, you're important for us, and we need you, and we want you to continue participating here. So that's participating in a philanthropic culture too. Having specialists, invite specialists to come and talk on different topics. A lot of people love that, when within their organizations, to have somebody come in and, it can be about anything really, but if you want somebody to come and talk about what is the philanthropic culture, if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself, well, again, share this presentation with them to talk about what it is exactly and get them to take part. Develop a cheat sheet. So I talked about this earlier, but this is a really important one. If you want people talking about your key messages, and you want everybody on board, and you want everybody saying the same thing, and you want to make sure they're saying the right things, we'll create a little cheat sheet for them with key messages. And people are going to appreciate that, because sometimes people, it's not that they don't want to talk, but they don't really know. They don't want to make any mistakes. They don't want to say something they're not supposed to be saying. So, when we talked about what are your organization's needs, that should be on your cheat sheet, and that way we can make sure everybody's using the same information, the same messages. Team building activities. So this is great. So I'm going to go back to my example at the hospice again. So when I talked about how we had created this us versus them, and it wasn't a very healthy dynamic for a while. So one of the ways that we did this, besides the other things I just presented, was creating these team building activities. So we had never done that before. Each team, each division was always doing their own little thing, but we were never doing something as a whole. So this is a great way to strengthen ties between all the different staff, and to develop a communities and a sense of belonging for everybody. So what we started doing too is having meetings in different locations, and sometimes just little things like that can seem so small, but it can just spark different ideas and encourage new ways of thinking. Plan and host an annual brainstorming session outside of your organization. So, often, when we're in the organization, again, and it's not the same thing as going outside somewhere. And again, it's energizing. I don't know if some of you have done this before, but it makes such a huge difference. So if you can do it, I encourage you to do that. Acknowledgement. So we talked a lot about this already. But now we're talking about not just acknowledging people outside your organization, your donors. What I'm talking about is acknowledging people internally. So when we acknowledge people internally, and when we're aware of everything that they're doing, it's a great way of engaging them, of showing them again that you're important to us. So make sure that you give them the necessary acknowledgements to some of the staff and the people internally. And, it's great to say thank you, but be specific. So, say, what are you thanking for exactly? So make sure that's clear. You can do things like, recognizing years of service with your organization, or whether it's somebody's birthday today, or there's another anniversary that they're celebrating, or, those are just little things. I know it seems kind of silly, sorry, to be talking about this, but there's simple things that go a long, long way in terms of creating that philanthropic cultures. When you can feel, when your people can feel like they're important and they matter. So these are just little tricks that you can incorporate. Highlight successes publicly if possible. So for example, if you have a board member or somebody who got some kind of honor or a prize or who was mentioned in a newspaper article, well, make sure you share that internally, because that's great. You know, you're acknowledging, you know, the effort that somebody put into this. And it's really demonstrating to them that everybody matters in the organization, everybody has a role to play, and everybody's engaged. And recognize the successes of the organization and share them with the team. So, you know, this is something I was talking with Catherine with, and I was guilty of this in probably all the organizations I worked with, but sometimes we're so busy in our day-to-day doing our own stuff that, you know, when there's, you know, successes happening around us, sometimes we don't always acknowledge them and we don't always share them with the team. So for example, I'll give you a more concrete example. When I worked at the hospice, if we got a donation and a more significant donation, you know, sometimes I would forget to share those good news stories with our board of directors. So even just sending them a little email saying, you know, great news, you know, such and such a company just confirmed a 5-year commitment. You know, sometimes they would have to wait until our regular scheduled board meeting would take place. But, you know, if we can share those kind of successes right away, it's like, hey, you know, you feel good being associated with the organization. It makes you want to take part and be an ambassador and share messages and get more involved. So you want to be associated with something great, some good news stories. So try and share them more often if you can. I know it's hard to do sometimes because, like I said, we get so caught up in our day-to-day, but take the time to really acknowledge those. It's going to, again, you're going to see it's going to make a difference. Present your team members on your website or your annual report, your newsletter. So sometimes we, you know, our stakeholders, our donors, etc., they know about our organization, but they don't know the people behind the organization. And when we sort of attach a human being to that, again, it's going to bring us in, it's going to engage us. So what a great way to do it. You know, put it on your website. You can do a profile in your annual report, in your newsletter. Those are just a few examples. But yeah, if you can present your team members somewhere, go ahead and do that. So surveys. So surveys are another way that we can acknowledge our people and show them that they matter. I mean, what a great way, right, is to get their opinions. I mean, people love giving their opinions. So why not ask internally for people's opinions by developing a quick little survey? It doesn't have to be anything complicated, anything too long, and it should always be anonymous. But you can get the opinion from your school board, principals, school staff, volunteers, and you can ask them about services, how you communicate with them, anything really. But again, it's just giving them, you know, the feedback that they matter and their opinions matter. Make sure it's anonymous. You're going to get more feedback that way. And if you don't want to do surveys, well, try something like a suggestion box. In my experience, you know, I have to be honest and say a suggestion box, a lot of people are hesitant to use them. But if it's something that could work for your organization instead of a survey, then why not? So I'm just to wrap it up before we get to any kind of questions, just so it's really, really clear. So when your whole team understands what a philanthropic culture is, and when they understand that it applies to everybody, and that there are several different forms that they can demonstrate it, okay? And when your organization can identify the roles and responsibilities in a philanthropic culture and the different ways of motivating and engaging team members, well, that's what's gonna give you a strong philanthropic culture. That's how you're gonna get people engaged. That's how you're gonna get them to participate and collaborate. So those are the signs of a strong philanthropic culture. So here's my last question. What can you do as of today to put into place a philanthropic culture within your CLC school?
Okay, so we have Sumin in the chat. She tells us she's going to work on a cheat sheet, getting that together.
Good. Excellent.
Simone is saying she'd love to present this webinar to the principals. Simone, I think that is a very, very good idea because as Marie-Claude was saying, you know, that's one of the ways that you can help share that messaging. And thinking about that as, you know, letting people know that they're also doing philanthropy in the context of a CLC school, right? So thanking people, acknowledging that they're already doing it, starting with the positive and reinforcing things that are already being done, helping people to really identify as philanthropists from the get-go, starting with where they are and then building that up.
That is such a great point, Catherine, because like you said, people are already doing this stuff, but they may not have viewed it as or defined it as philanthropy. So, you know, once we can tell them, hey, you're already doing this stuff and you're contributing to a philanthropic culture. So, you know, keep doing that great work. And by the way, here are just some other ideas that you could also incorporate. So, you know, great point. I think that that's encouraging for people.
Do you have a question here about, you know, the cheat sheet? What could that look like?
Well, cheat sheet, a few things. So right off the bat, you know how I was talking about your mission. So if you suspect that people are not really getting your mission because like you know, sometimes, like I said, it can be kind of long and, you know, we don't really get it. Sometimes we use a language that's like really, you know, it's kind of convoluted. Well, try and change, don't change your mission statement, but try and, you know, switch it up a little bit to put it in a way that it's easy for people to talk about. Because when people are out there talking and spreading your messages, we don't want them to say, well, the mission of our organization is to such and such and such. We don't want to sound like robots. We want to sound natural. So, you know, put keywords, put it in a simple way so that they can talk about your mission, but in a way that people are going to get it right away like that. So that's one thing. When I talked about your needs, okay, so make sure that's clear. So what are some of your needs, you know, as a school, as a community center? Like what are you out there having to go and get? So make sure that you have some of those needs that are clear so that if anybody ever asks some of the stuff, well, what is it that you guys need? Anybody is in a position to answer that. They're not going to have to say, well, I don't really know. Let me go get my, you know, we should all be able to answer that. You should, in a cheat sheet too, you could also have different way. If somebody asks you, or one of your staff members, how can I help? What can I do? In your cheat sheet, you could also state, like, what are different ways that people can get involved? They can get involved by following you on Facebook. They can get involved by subscribing to your newsletter. They can get involved by participating at some of your events. If they have a little bit of time that they could give. So write that on your cheat sheet so people know exactly what to say if they're ever asked that question. So those are just a few ideas. You don't want to have a book either, you know, you want it to be simple so that people, the cheat sheet will be automatic. You know, after a while, they're going to have memorized this information and it's going to be natural. They're just going to talk about it very naturally and automatically. So keep it really, really simple. Keep it about your key messages, but those are just a few examples of the things I like to put. And another big one, sorry if I can add that one, is your impact. What difference are you making in the community? That's a really important one too. So if you can give them a very simple message about what difference you're making, that goes a long way.
Yeah, and I can tie that back to this process that we kind of guide all of the CDAs, the community development agents through, which is your elevator speech. Right. So thinking back on that and how that incorporates those needs. And one of the wonderful things that you have at your disposal is your action plan. So all of your needs that are already there, you have those goals set out for you. So how do you turn that into a cheat sheet document that you can share with internally with staff members, that's a little bit more, simplified, straightforward, so that they're not kind of looking at a whole action plan or a whole strategic plan, but pulling from those. And I'd also like to remind everyone that you have access to some infographics and visuals that you can use. We have examples from different projects of, one-pagers and things like that. But also if it is, just a PowerPoint that highlights those messages, anything that you can put to simplify. And if any of you do create something, please feel free to share it with the network, because then we can each build on that. If that's something that you'd like us to help you create, please let us know. We'd be happy to help. But are there books or any other resources that you would recommend, Marie-Claude, to learn more about this framework and philanthropy in general?
Yeah, well, maybe not so much a book, but I'm gonna, there's three kind of umbrella organizations in Canada that I really, really like, that where you're gonna find anything related to philanthropy. And like, really, when I say anything, you'll find anything in those three organizations. And I talked about some of them in the past webinars, but I'm going to repeat them here. One is Imagine Canada. The other is Charity Village. And the other one is CanadaHelps.org. The reason I promote those is, well, they're national and they're umbrella in the sense that they don't specifically talk about, fundraising or, fundraising activities or governance or whatever. They capture everything related to philanthropy. So no matter what kind of resources or help or information that you're looking for, you can usually find it on these websites. And if you can't find it on those websites, what they're really good at too is sort of redirecting you to where you can find the information. So what I do is, personally, I subscribe to their newsletters and their blogs, and they're great sources of inspiration. So have a look at those and you might find it really, really useful. What you're going to notice, sometimes people think it's going to be like this big magic wand or this big, revelation that we're going to get that's going to change, our whole way of doing philanthropy in our organization. And I think what you were able to see with the presentation is that it doesn't work that way. It's really a series of small little gestures and steps that you can take one at a time. And that's what's eventually going to change the whole philanthropic culture. So, I want to keep it simple. I don't want to complicate things for everyone, but start with just doing little things. Like I said, by spreading key messages, by being an ambassador, by, doing something like those thank you calls. That's a really easy one to put in place too, but start with those little ones and you'll see it's gonna grow. And once people get started, they're gonna feel good about it, and they're gonna want to take on more. So it doesn't have to be complicated. Keep it simple, but start somewhere. So thank you to everybody. And if any, I didn't say it the last time, but if anybody ever has any questions or something, you have my contact information there, and feel free to write to me or call me. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much.